Hello, and what is up, y'all? We got One Piece 1128 here with us today, and it's a fun chapter, to say the least, right? We are in adventure mode once again. I don't know what it is, but whenever we enter a new arc, it just fills me with a lot of joy. And so far, in the past 2 chapters, I can verifiably say that Elbaf has been a hell of a time. So, to start things off, we have a color spread this week. Unfortunately, for all the Yamato lovers out there, we are not continuing that journey today. Instead, we have a color spread depicting the Strawhats as wizards flying through the sky using brooms, and there's a giant purple dragon right behind them. It's pretty cool. I've never really seen this before. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Oda actually took 2 color spread requests and he combined them into one. Kind of shows that we are nearing the end of One Piece. Oda probably has like a bajillion requests in his backlog. He probably looked at them and said, hey, there's no way I'm gonna do all of these, so why not cut it down a little bit by combining them together? And that is how we ended up with such a brilliant and glorious color spread this week. So one thing that sticks out to me, and I've mentioned this again and again, but Western dragons. I think they're going to be very important once we hit Marie Joie. And now you might be wondering why. Why, Sai, would Western dragons be so important? Well, 2 things. 1, celestial dragons love Western dragons. I don't know what it is. They got no love for the Eastern ones, right? Like Kaido and Momonosuke. But when it comes to Western dragons, they do like them. So much so that back in Punk Hazard, when we saw that giant red dragon, it actually got a name from the Celestial Dragons. I believe it was named Number 13. It might have a second name given to them by Celestial Dragons, but that is what Brownbeard told us. Brownbeard said that the Celestial Dragons liked it so much, they, gave it special treatment. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Another thing that is noteworthy of Western Dragons is that in one of the first filler arcs of One Piece, Oda introduced, and keep in mind, early One Piece, Oda was involved in a lot of the filler, but Oda introduced a species called the Millennium Dragons, and they were all Western dragons as well. So I think there is some weird play with dragons here, and then plus we have the mystery as to why they're called celestial dragons in the first place. So I feel like once we do hit the Void Century, once we learn more about how the Holy Land functions, I feel like we're gonna see some more of these creatures we see in the color spread. Outside of that though, I do gotta say, the Straw Hats fits in the color spread are quite phenomenal. They're simple, they're nice, they remind me of Harry Potter, and I think Oda really nailed it. So going on to the chapter now though, we got chapter 1128 titled RPG, which could mean 2 things. It's either a rocket-propelled grenade or a role-playing game. And personally, if you held the gun to my head and say choose one or the other, I think Oda was going for a role-playing game in this scenario, simply because of the circumstance that the Straw Hats are in, with them being, I'm gonna cut ahead a little bit, with them being in a giant birdcage, with them being dressed up like toys. I do think that this is a role-playing game that Oda is referencing. And not to mention, people have pointed out that if you go back 100 chapters exactly to chapter 1028, Oda actually did a color spread where the Straw Hats were video game characters. So I think it's quite fitting that Oda kind of tied all of this together in some weird sense. But yes, we got the first page, and Sanji is skywalking in the air with Nami. They're trying to get a good look at the town below them, and they're like, yeah, this place is really weird, but it doesn't seem to be a dream. Sanji's reasoning for it is simply because there's too many damn guys. We then cut over to Zoro, and he tells us that the monster trio weren't together at the start of this adventure. Zoro was on the opposite side of town, Luffy was in the forest eating the ear god, and Sanji most likely was just somewhere else as well. Probably just fighting the bees that he mentioned last chapter too. And then on the side, we have Luffy having a conversation with Usopp, and Luffy kind of gasses Usopp up a good amount. He looks to Usopp and he's like, hey, you could have beaten that cat lion. Like, you could have done it, dude. And for me, at least, I kind of see this scene in 2 different lights. In one light, Luffy believes in Usopp. But in another light, it kind of seems like Luffy would be a little bit upset or disappointed if Usopp couldn't beat the cat lion, which I also thought was kind of interesting. I wonder if we'll get to a point in Elbaf where Luffy looks at Usopp and he says, hey, Usopp, stop beating around the bush. You need to man up and fight this thing right now. You can do it, buddy. But as far as this cat lion situation goes, Usopp kind of explains why he couldn't beat it. He says, when I woke up, I was panicking, he was eating me, I couldn't do anything. And it's like, yo, Luffy believes in Usopp. he thinks that he can beat him. You know, I would argue that Usopp probably could. You know, Usopp has the bamboo shoots, Usopp has exploding grass bombs, he even has his powerful impact wolf attack, and it's like, yeah, Usopp could have taken him. And forget Usopp, Nami could have taken him. Like, if they weren't panicking in that scenario, I do think they would have won. But, you know, Luffy calling him out here on it is great because I feel like Usopp has to be aware that he can win these fights. You know, he just needs the courage to do it, which I do think comes full circle with Usopp's dream of becoming a brave warrior of the sea. I'm glad Luffy is calling him out here, and I'm glad Usopp is listening to the feedback to some extent, right? I do think that by the time we leave Elbaf, or by the time, you know, we part ways with the giants, Usopp will have the courage to tackle these situations, to win these battles that he should be winning. So speaking of Usopp, we move on to the second page, and he says, hey, this place isn't Elbaf. It can't be Elbaf. Look at us. We're dressed in Viking attire, Elbaf clothing. But the clothing we're wearing is for people, you know? Like, the giants wouldn't have these. And I understand that sentiment, but I don't fully agree with it personally. I know this is like a small tidbit, but you know, I feel like by the time we hit Elbaf, there will be human-sized clothing for the Straw Hats, or just tourists in general, because people visit Elbaf, you know, humans go there, so I'm sure there's like some giant or some, you know, Norse person over here making clothes for little people, like Shanks has been there, for example, Vegapunk's been there, and there's even that weird character off the coast of Elbaf who I think is human, or human-sized, so it's like, yeah, like people go to Elbaf, I'm sure they have clothing for people. But either way, Usopp looks at that and he says, hey, we're not there. And then, of course, we add onto it the fact that all of the buildings around them are people-sized. And it's like, okay, now I see it, right? Now I see the vision. And, you know, they're like, hey, we don't see any giants. We don't see the rest of our crew. You know, Sanji even points that out, which I thought was kind of cool. You know, Sanji was like, hey, my women radar isn't activating. You know, Robin's not here for sure. And I was like, okay, like, yeah, I like it when the Straw Hats kind of flex that observation hockey, or that hockey in general. So I thought that was pretty cool. So they have this little adventure in the, quote, land of Legos. And that is when they stumble upon a biker, if that's what we should call him. So he's riding a grasshopper, and gut instinct, you know, right away, this reminds me of the Kaido Big Mom illustration that Oda released, I think, 3 months ago. Pretty cool image if you ask me. Here it is right here. But yeah, the biker shows up. Nami and Sanji back away in absolute terror, which I think is hilarious. And this is a great callback because this happened all the way back in Jaya. I believe they were looking for the South Bird with Usopp, and I think it was a spider, or maybe it was like a giant cockroach, but something showed up in the woods, and then Nami and Sanji both hid in some bushes, and they're like, oh, we hate bugs, you know, get that thing away from us. So I like that Oda's having that little callback there. But if I wanted to get conspiratorial, I could say that this is another sign that Nami has some royal, potentially celestial dragon world government blood running within her. And you might be wondering, where the hell did that come from? So, in this final saga, Oda has made it a key note that all of the Gorosei, including Imu, have been referring to humans as insects. You know, they have this whole hatred against insects going on that's really pronounced in the Japanese language as well. And then when we got to Egghead Island, we saw that Bonnie was deathly afraid of insects. And then there's Luffy, on the other hand, who has always been a keen fan of insects. So there is this weird parallel going on with world nobles not liking insects, and then people of the D-Clan liking insects. And the reason why I'd go as far to say the people of the D-Clan is because we did see a cover page where Luffy, Ace, and Sambo were all playing with giant beetles. And, you know, with the beetle thing, Luffy time and time again has showed us that he loves beetles. He's picked one up at Egghead Island, he picked one up at Jaya, and then even at Jaya, I always bring this up, but when Chopper asked Luffy which one is more important, the One Piece or a beetle, Luffy literally could not answer that question. So I do think there is something weird going on here. And then with Nami, I think this is maybe a hint that she has some royal blood in her. We don't know who her parents actually are. Bellemere just found her at Oikot Village. So I think some shenanigans could be afoot with Nami's bloodline. And then as far as Sanji goes, we don't have to explain that because we do know that Sanji is a Vinsmoke, and the Vinsmokes were a part of the world government way back in the past. So yes, I do think this is another nod that Oda is trying to throw in here, saying that there is something more at play when it comes to Nami's character. But of course, that's just me. If you think I'm crazy, so be it, you know. That is why we're here for, right? We're here to make these weird connections. If they come true, cool. If they don't, I'm a lunatic, you know, it's a win-win at the end of the day. So yes, we have this crazy grasshopper Viking here in front of us, and he gives us some insight as to where we're at. He's like, hey, you guys have stumbled upon the land of gods. You all must be newcomers here. He's like, but before I get too deep into this, I don't have a lot of time to chat because I gotta bring some food to the needle god. And it's like, okay, like needle god, that's weird. And then he explains and he tells us that it's a giant hedgehog. And it's like, okay, giant hedgehog, huh? You mean like the one Zeus fried up last chapter? And then he goes on and tells us about the ear god and how he was burnt to a crisp in the forest. And it's like, ooh, yeah, about that, right? I mean, it's so bad that Nami and the rest of the group have to shut Luffy up, right? Because Luffy would just be like, hey, yeah, we kind of killed them. So yeah, he describes it as a land of gods. We've killed and defeated all of their gods, sad to say. And outside of that, though, he does tell us to not go to a certain place. He's like, hey, I gotta get on with my day, but you guys, since you're newcomers here, I gotta warn you, do not go to the other side of the castle. That is where the Sun God's shrine is. And in that shrine, he's got some guardians there, some powerful, powerful guardians. And of course, we are back in old school One Piece now. The comedy, the slapstick humor, it is in full effect. Luffy hears this. He runs off without a second thought, without a moment's of hesitation. He runs off in that direction, and Zoro follows suit. Zoro's probably the funniest part here because Zoro looks down all menacingly. He's like, "Oh, powerful guardians, you say?" It's like, damn, Zoro, dude, we're supposed to be on friendly terms with the giants. Which actually ties back to something Usopp says in this chapter as well, which is another reason why I think by the end of the chapter, we're not fighting, the person in the room with us. So Usopp says, hey, if this is the land of giants, if we are on Elbaf, please, guys, let's be friendly, right? We don't want to antagonize the giants. We want to enter one arc where we're not the opposing team. We want to hold hands with them and sing Kumbaya. And I just wanted to bring this up now because I have seen people talking about the chapter already, and a sentiment, not a big sentiment, but there are a handful of people who are like, hey, why are the Strawhats running, right? They shouldn't be running from the Sun God. They shouldn't be running from this mysterious character who kidnapped them. Why don't they just beat him up? And it's like, well, Dory and Brogy live here. Oimo and Kashi live here. We were hanging out with the giants a minute ago. We don't know what happened. We don't even know how we got here, right? So I think it's smart to not throw fists right away, but we'll see, right? I mean, animals can catch the fists whenever, right? Luffy will eat them, goddammit. But when it comes to the giants themselves, yeah, maybe we'll let them slide, or we wait until they attack us first. So yes, Luffy ends up running off in one direction. He ends up hitting a mirror. It shatters, and then that is when we realize that this entire time, we've been inside. I don't know what to call it. People have been calling it a diorama. It could be called the bird cage, a reptile cage even. But either way, it's a cage. We are on display here. We quite literally are role-playing as Elbafians, if that's what they're actually called. So this is pretty cool, and it is not what I expected. If you watched my last video, when we saw the castle, I was like, hey, maybe... the castle, Big Sun Castle, is a giant's playground. That's the giant's toy house. Woohoo! Little did I know that I was short-sighted, because not only was Big Sun Castle the playhouse, it was the whole damn village. It was the whole damn village, Big Sun Castle in Yggdrasil. We are in a cage. We are a giant's plaything. This giant has a little bit of a sick hobby going on, huh? So once we break this mirror, we see that Chopper is actually right outside. The Sun God, or I need to give him a different name. It's weird calling him the Sun God because we know he kind of isn't the Sun God, but the mysterious giant has thrown a really tight collar onto Chopper, and this makes a lot of sense for a couple of different reasons. One, it looks like all the animals here, whether it be in the cage or out of the cage, this guy has an affinity for animals. That is just what it is, right? So the fact that he sees Chopper, this weird creature, this tanuki reindeer abomination with the devil fruit, he's like, hey, I gotta get this guy on my side. So it makes sense why Chopper got special treatment in that regard, but I am wondering, since this is a diorama of Elbaf, I think everything that we saw in this fake village actually exists in the real Elbaf as well. So hear me out, right? This is mini Elbaf. Yggdrasil exists in mini Elbaf. So because that is the case, I do believe that a real Yggdrasil, a really big one, exists on Elbaf or Warland, because a diorama is supposed to mirror and mimic what actually exists in the real world. You know, it's supposed to be a replica. So yes, I think Yggdrasil exists. I think Big Sun Castle might even be real. And now I'm kind of curious about the animals that we see here as well. I do wonder if there is an actual needle god hedgehog that exists on Elbaf, or maybe even an ear god that exists on Elbaf. And same for the giant transforming cat. Right, I think there is a chance that we will see bigger and better versions of everything we saw here in this diorama. And I think that's actually kind of fascinating, because once we leave this diorama as well, we see a decent-sized snake named Hilmengard, which is supposed to be like a knockoff version of Jormungandr. Which hopefully I'm pronouncing these right. I feel like I'm butchering the language. I apologize in advance. It's not my specialty. And then we also see a crow named Mugen, which is a mixture of Odin's ravens names. So it does seem like we're looking at knockoff versions of things that should exist. So yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. And I also do think that Odin has a lot of foreshadowing at play here as well. Because, you know, going back to Little Garden, Dori and Brogi, they referenced a blood-soaked serpent, which could be Jormungand. And it's like, wait a minute, does that actually exist? And if so, if Dori and Brogi combined together can't take it down, who will? And it's like, oh, maybe it's Luffy, right? Maybe it's the sun god who takes down this blood-soaked serpent, or whatever they're talking about. And then we also had the 3 rats who were just scurrying around the sun god's shrine. And we don't get names for those guys, but we do know that in Norse mythology, there are rats that eat the foliage of the Yggdrasil tree. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe that is what they're going to be named later, if we even go back to them at all. They're kind of on the floor, right? When we were fighting the guys, like the snake was up here, you know, the crow's flying up, and then there's the rats who are just kind of chilling on the ground. One small detail about the giant snake that I only noticed on my 3rd or 4th read through is that when Luffy defeats him, that snake starts emitting this black fire or black aura around him, and I can't help but immediately think back to the Gorosei, where whenever they're damaged, black flames end up healing their wounds. So I kind of wonder if that's what the snake is doing after Luffy beats him, or if that's just stylistic hockey emitting from his body. I'm not talking about the panel where Luffy does the booming dawn pistol. I'm talking about the panel where the sun god shouts out, Hilmengandr! But yeah, getting back to Chopper though, I feel like if the Straw Hats didn't rescue him in a timely manner in this chapter, he probably would have gotten a Norse mythological name, right? Like, I don't know what they would have named Chopper. I do know that all the deers have D's in their names, so maybe it would have been something like that. Unless you're talking about the Valhalla deer. There's a lot of Norse deer who are really important. But yeah, I feel like Chopper would have joined the Shrine Guardians. He might have been dropped in the diorama as another, quote, God of Elbaf. I don't know. Like, I kind of wish we knew what they were planning with Chopper. So while the Straw Hats are hanging out and fighting the animals in the Sun God's room, we see the Sun God is making their appearance. And I love their entrance. I don't know what it is, but he has, or she, we don't know which one it is yet because they're wearing a mask, but they have this aura to them. Like, we start off with them just walking, they got some heels on, they got some boots rocking, and they also have like this sun shield on their back. They have a staff that has like the sun symbol at the top of it. They have a deer skull with antlers, this crazy fur coat. And I'm like, damn, this is a good design. You know, I really like the way they look. But I do gotta say, they don't exactly remind me of the sun god. You know, like, I'm not even basing it off of Luffy, but if I saw this guy walking in Detroit, my first thought wouldn't be, yo, it's the sun god. No, like, I'm like, it's a weirdo. There's a weird guy outside. So I am kind of curious to see what's going on here. But hear me out. Right, if that diorama is supposed to be a mock version of Elbaf-Warland, then I think that maybe this guy is just simply role-playing as the Sun God. This isn't the actual Sun God of Elbaf. I don't even think he has that title outside of this room. For all we know, this could just be a guy named Daniel. But here's the thing though, right? Even if this is just a normal giant, they are really unique. Luffy says his eyes are pretty big, right? Which is kind of a weird statement to make, but the guy is bigger than your average giant, according to Luffy and Usopp. And then not to mention, but they're also a lot slimmer than the giants we've seen before. I mean, Dory, Brogy, Oimo, like all the giants, man, these guys are like really big, burly guys. So I don't really know what's going on here. This could be an ancient giant. This could be a giant hybrid even, because somebody pointed out, but we do have the Yeti Cool Brothers, who are an unknown subclass of giant. We also have Wotans, which are fishman giants. So I think this guy or girl, whoever this is, I do think they are special, but I just don't buy their sun god shtick quite yet. It does seem like they're just role-playing as the sun god, more so than anything. And one thing that kind of was fascinating is that when they walk into the room and open the door, and they see Luffy choking his snake, Luffy's in his Sun God Nika form, and this guy doesn't say anything about it. You know, they just look at it and they're like, whoa! My room, my cage, you know, what is going on here? And I understand it, right? There's a lot of shock here, but I feel like if this person knew that Luffy was the sun god or knew what the sun god looked like, they might have had a different reaction, right? Because Dory and Brogy, when they first got to Egghead Island, the first thing they said, hey, you know, we're here to get the sun god. We're here to bring him to Elbaf. When they cut open Jupiter, they were like, hey, the sun god, man, like it's dark in there, huh? You don't belong in there. So the fact that this guy just saw Luffy in Gear 5th and didn't really bat an eye at it, it does make me wonder. So yeah, there's a lot of weird things in regards to this character. And one thing a lot of people have been pointing out, and I agree, it is very, very strange. But during the God Valley flashback, we did see a Holy Knight who also had a deer skull and a staff as well. Huh, right? Like, I don't know. Are they connected? I think there's a chance. I don't think it's 0%, right? Because hear me out. Back when we got that God Valley flashback, a lot of people also pointed out that one of the Holy Knights, or one of the world government participants, they wore a gas mask. And people, I can't believe we have, you know, freaking sleuths out here, you know, detectives in the making, but people said, yo, that's the same gas mask we saw in Big Mom's flashback. One of the kids that Big Mom supposedly ate, which granted we didn't see it on screen, but one of the kids that Big Mom supposedly ate wore a gas mask that looked really similar to what we saw on the Holy Knight. And I was like, okay, you know, that's pretty close, you know? Like, I don't know if the timelines match up. I didn't exactly do the math yet, but I had that in my back pocket. I was like, maybe I'll save that for a rainy day. And here's the thing, right? One coincidence, sure, it happens. You know, how many gas mask designs could you actually make out there that are unique? But now we have a second case where the guy in this chapter, the quote, sun god, has the same head as one of the Holy Knights. And now I do believe that Oda is doing something here. You know, one time, sure, I'll let it pass. 2 times, okay. I think Oda is going to connect all of this. And one big factor you have to remember as well, one thing that connects these two, quote, Holy Knight designs is the fact that they're both tied to Elbaf in some way. Obviously, this is a giant, so that is the connection there. But as far as the Big Mom flashback kid, the Big Mom flashback kid actually lived on Elbaf for a while and then later moved to Sheepshead Island. And it's like, wait, what does Elbaf have to do with the Holy Knights? You know, like, what is going on here? What is Oda cooking? I don't know what it is. But personally, man, I think it smells pretty damn good. Reeling it back a little bit, though, I don't think that this guy is the dear Holy Knight we saw back at God Valley. And the same goes for the kid in the Big Mom flashback. I simply think that there's going to be something that connects these 4 characters together. I'm just not too sure what yet. Another interesting connection we can make with the fake sun god's deer skull head is that we've actually seen this before, not just with the Holy Knights, but with Haruden, a member of the Grand Fleet, because his ship, the Nagfar, which hopefully I pronounced that right too, but his ship actually has a figurehead that depicts a deer skull. So I ended up doing some very minor research on Nagfar, Haruden's ship, and in Norse mythology, that ship actually was made out of the fingernails and toenails of the dead. Kind of crazy, but one thing I did find interesting is that during the events of Ragnarok, they actually sailed on this boat to do battle with the gods, which I think is quite fitting. Since Hardin's ship resembles this fake sun god, there is a chance that maybe this is what the Elbafians think of when they think of the sun god. Maybe this guy's cosplay is actually lore accurate, or what people believe the sun god actually looks like. One last prediction I do want to make in regards to this false sun god is that maybe they are going to be an Elbaf princess. I know that's a pretty crazy assumption to make based off of the little evidence we have, but we do know that they do wear high heels, and multiple characters in this chapter have stated that this person is very delicate because they crafted this entire city, because they crafted the clothes that the Strawhats are currently wearing. So yeah, maybe this is a woman's touch at play. Another route we could go is that maybe this is a different Norse goddess. Maybe this is Freya, because Freya not only has a staff like the sun god has in this chapter, but Freya is also associated with animals as well. Another reason why I really enjoy the Elbaf princess route is simply because time and time again, the Strawhats have gotten involved with princesses of certain countries. Vivi is an example, Rebecca being another one, and even Shirahoshi. And to spin this off of Shirahoshi, she has control over sea kings and fish. Well, we could meet an Elbaf princess here that has command over land animals, and that's why that diorama has a bunch of creatures in it, and that is why they wanted to capture Chopper, because they have an affinity towards land animals, which would be the opposite spin of Shirahoshi. So yes, like I said, the sun god has now walked into the room. Luffy is choking out his snake, and my god, the room is on fire. It's complete and utter chaos. So now, real quick, but bouncing off of fires that are going out of control, I want to talk about Luffy, because he is the real sun god, and he's about to arrive on Elbaf, or wherever the hell we are. I do think that we will get some, I don't know what to exactly call it, but like a Zoan takeover. I think Luffy's Sun God Nika fruit will run rampant once he hits Warland, because that is where Sun God Nika originated from. And based on what Dr. Vegapunk told us, alongside what the Gorosei said back in Wano, we do know that Zoan devil fruits have a, quote, will of their own. So I think once Luffy brings this fruit back to its origins, once he visits the sun god's house or something, like the real sun god's house, I think the Sun God Nika fruit will go a little bit berserk. Whether that's a good thing or bad thing, I don't know yet, but I do think that is something we should definitely keep an eye out moving forward in this arc. And of course, like I said earlier, we don't know if we're even on Elbaf, but we could be on some weird super giant pirate ship. We could be on an island off the coast of Elbaf. Like, there's a couple of different routes Oda could go with this, but I'm not too sure. One thing is for certain though, when you look at the panels where the sun god is walking towards the room the Strawhats are in, you can see like the wooden pillars above him, and even like the framing of the door, and like the candles and the bookshelves, and it does fall in line with what I would call Nordic themes and Nordic architecture, but I'm afraid to put the chips down, brother. I really am. Like, with how many, psychs and gotchas that Oda's thrown at us thus far in these past 2 chapters, I don't know what to believe, y'all. I really don't. So, like I said, Luffy and the group, they beat up the guy's animals. He's pretty upset at that. And now the Straw Hats, their only choice is to run back inside the diorama. They see the cat is cat. They hop on top of him and they start taking off. Nami reveals that she actually found blueprints while they were in that room, and that if they just keep on going straight and if they burst through another mirror, they will be outside. But we don't know what that means. Like I said, we don't even know where the hell we are. We could break the mirror and end up in Elbaf. We could break the mirror and be in the middle of the sea. Like, we don't know. I mean, technically, when you think about a diorama, like, it's just a box. So I feel like once they break out, they're just gonna hit a dead end? Like, it feels like it's up against the wall. We don't really get like a full 3D layout of the room, but I can't imagine this leads outside. Unless, like, this is connected to a window, maybe? I don't know. I don't know. Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention earlier on in this video is when the grasshopper dude was talking about the gods that reside in this diorama, he simply called the hedgehog the needle god, and then he called the rabbit the ear god. But for the cat that we're riding on, it doesn't have a god title. Instead, the thing is just named Iscat. So I wonder if this cat truly is special. Like maybe once we break out of this diorama, we find out that this cat actually belongs to someone special. Because the cat did have a 3-pointed crown, and people said, oh, like this cat, you know, it could be Loki because Loki has a crown that looks kind of the same. So maybe this is actually Loki's cat and will rescue him from this psychopathic giant? I don't know, right? Like, I say this pretty often, but we got more questions coming off of this chapter than answers. So your guess is as good as mine, guys. One thing I'm kind of wondering about now is whether or not Shanks, Vegapunk, Haruden, you know, Dory, Brugge, or Mokashi, I wonder if they know this guy. Like, is this guy like the resident Elbaf stranger? Like, you know, he's just over here collecting humans for his little playset. Is this guy actually nobility? Since he is, you know, larger or at least bigger or stranger than the typical giant. I'm not super sure. I just don't know if he's a villain. I think that's the one thing I'm kind of hung up on. Like, yeah, he's kidnapping people. Yeah, like, it's not exactly looking great, you know, base level. But if he was a villain, I feel like we would have heard about him, or maybe Shanks would have dealt with him since this is, or maybe Warland. I gotta stop assuming this is Warland at this point because anything can happen. But one thing, you know, shoutouts to the Willow Marco over on Twitter. But he pointed out that when this guy or girl walks into the room, they say, "My shrine!" But the way they say "my shrine," they use the same self-pronoun that the samurai and Wano use as well. So because of that, maybe, just maybe, they're like some weird Wano giant hybrid? But then again, the people of Wano aren't exactly their own race, you know, they're just humans. But yeah, we got some weird things afoot here. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this, man. Do you think this is the actual sun god? Do you think he's an impersonator? Do you think it's somebody just role-playing as the sun god? You know, they got the fake Elbaf here. They want to pretend like they're a god, or at least a god they've heard about before. Or no, like what are your thoughts about this guy? You know, now that we're bringing the sun god back into the equation, I wouldn't be super surprised if this guy has buddies, and his buddies are like, you know, the rain god, the forest god, and the earth god that we heard back in Skypiea. Kind of just imagining 4 guys just dressed up like this, all hanging around the fake Elbaf pretending they're gods. I don't know, y'all. This chapter definitely left me stumped, but I did think it was a really, really, really fun time. Like I said, this reminds me of classic One Piece. The nostalgia was hitting, the comedy was hitting, and the sense of bewilderment and adventure were also there as well. Also, one idea that I do want to bring up is that there is a chance that this guy is on our side, and once he realizes that Luffy is the real sun god, then he'll actually change his tune and be buddy-buddy with us. Because maybe he just doesn't know, right? Maybe he's just oblivious to the real sun god in front of him. And one reason why I think he might actually be an ally at the end of the day has to do with what Usopp said at the beginning of this chapter. He said, oh, we might not actually be on Elbaf because our clothing is too small. On Elbaf, they might not make clothes for humans. If that is true, then this guy, the fake sun god, might be our best bet at getting Elbaf clothing for Jinbei, Robin, Frankie, and Brook, who are currently not here. So yeah, I can totally see a world where this guy becomes our friend, and he ends up sharing clothing with the rest of the crew. And now, the last thing I just want to bring up before we end this video, and I'll touch on this really briefly because I've been talking about this all week, but the inconsistencies and mistakes we saw in chapter 1127. I have always been of the mindset that those were just genuine mistakes. If you've read One Piece for a while now, if you've seen the volumes and the changes, Oda and his team, they make mistakes. They're humans. It's no big deal in my opinion. But of course, there were a lot of theories that, you know, because of those mistakes, that Luffy is not actually Luffy, that, you know, this isn't actually real life, and that these are all actually just hallucinations. But I genuinely just don't believe that theory. Of course, I respect it. Like, you know, if it happens, it happens. But there was nothing in this chapter to substantiate that. I mean, this feels really real. I mean, of course, we have like the weirdness with the giant sun god, but he's his own thing. We saw him walking outside of this room before he even entered, so he's definitely real. But yeah, I think they were just honest to God mistakes, and that happens, right? You have a team of 10 plus people working on a single chapter every week. yeah, mistakes happen. Like, things slip through the cracks. It's no big deal. If you go back to any One Piece volume that's ever released, they all have around 10 plus mistakes that they have to go back and change at a later date. People have pointed out that whenever a big mistake takes place in One Piece, that Oda, his team, you know, the Twitter account, they go back and they recorrect it quickly. But I would argue that the mistakes that were made last chapter are very minor. Those don't exactly warrant like a PSA saying, hey guys, we got gear 3rd and 4th mixed up. You know, Luffy's sword right here is actually an axe. Like, I think they're all just so minor inconsistencies that it doesn't really matter. But that's my own personal opinion. If you still believe that this is a hallucination and that, you know, these are all illusions, that is totally fair. But I'm personally just not there. I do think that we will see illusions and hallucinations later, but last chapter was not an indicator of that. When it comes to the Green Fairy, when it comes to that absinthe and its effects, I think we'll see that later, and it'll explain how we got here, right? The Straw Hats were hallucinating, they were drunk, and then one thing led to another, and then they ended up in this guy's house. I think that's what happened. I think that's where we will see hallucinations, but as far as it being in this chapter, I really don't imagine it. And then as far as illusions go, I feel like once we meet Loki, once we get more insight as to what this guy with the staff is all about, I think we will see some tomfoolery, 100%. But with that being said though, guys, thank you guys so much for joining me on today's video. I really freaking appreciate it. Let me know, like I said, all your thoughts down below. Any theories, any comments, anything you want to bring up and talk about, because we will be running this back in the next couple of days and just going over your guys' comments. So yeah, have a great weekend. Have a great rest of your day. My name is Sai, and I'm signing out. Peace.